You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
Okay, hey there, welcome back to Getting Lit. Last time I was joined by my friend Dean and we discussed Flannery O'Connor, and today I'll be talking about Roland Barthes' book, Camera Lucida, and Chris Marker's experimental film La Jetée. Before I wanted to do that, I sort of wanted to start with a bit of context for this episode. So I've moved recently. I'm currently sitting in my study in my new house. It's a cool neighborhood and close to a lot of friends and bars that I love. So I'm kind of happy where I've landed after sort of traveling all over the place for a while. Moving is never great though. So even if something doesn't go wrong, it's always at least exhausting looking for places and then fucking moving itself. But luckily, this place kind of landed in my lap thanks to a friend of a friend who I found it through, which is actually lucky for me, given how sort of difficult it is to find a house in Melbourne at the moment. So I tell all this not just to give you an update on my life, but also because as I was unpacking, I came across a couple of Polaroids that I'd completely sort of forgotten about. And Polaroids, because obviously I'm not old enough to be around in the 80s when we had Polaroids, but someone had taken these. I can't remember who had taken these. Someone with a Polaroid, obviously. I never owned one, and gave me these photos. This was probably around wouldn't say 2010s, probably around 2015, that kind of era when Polaroids became this cool thing sort of to have, at parties and stuff like that. So it was really weird to sort of experience that and find these Polaroids as I was unpacking. And I mean, like most millennials, I don't really own like many physical photographs. So I've taken heaps of photos, obviously, but they're technically all owned by social media companies, I guess. Is that how it works? Like if you take photos and upload them to Instagram, does it? I think it technically means Facebook owns them. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I have these two pictures, and they weren't really taken at particularly sort of momentous occasions in my life. They were just pretty ordinary photos, but I got extremely emotional and verklempt when I found them. So just to describe what they look like, I'm holding them in my hand right now, actually. One was sort of taken at a party, I think. I can't even remember what party it was. I don't remember whose party it was. But yeah, it's taken by someone a few years ago, probably 2016. The person who had taken it might have been the host, because they might have, been taking photos of the guests, or it could have just been someone I knew who had a Polaroid camera and was taking it around with them everywhere. But the picture has a photo of me with my ex-boyfriend, his arm around me. We're both sort of smiling amongst jugs filled with sort of, it looks like punch. It could be beer as well. I'm not sure. So it's pretty funny. I look a lot fatter in that photo, which maybe that's what made me emotional, because I looked fatter than I am now, and I don't want to be fat. So maybe that's what it was. The other photo was taken while I was bumping in for a theater show when I used to help run a theater company. This was, I think it might have been the bump in for my show, because it's me, the director, and the producers in there. And it's a sort of dark photo where the really unforgiving flash of the Polaroid has made us all really pale. But it's all very dark in the background. So our faces are kind of smiling and disembodied and floating in the darkness, which I find really charming. Also can't remember who took that one, but I find that scenario pretty funny, but also at the same time, I had this like very visceral sort of emotional reaction to it as well. Um, so like I said, both pictures pretty simple, pretty mundane. So I've just been trying, well, amongst like folding my clothes and hanging stuff up and just generally organizing my life in this new place, just been trying to work out what the hell happened there? What was this sort of emotional reaction that I had? Why did I respond so sort of intensely to it? Um, when, and I kid you not, this actually happened. I love synchronicities. I was unpacking my books, and I noticed my very well-worn copy of Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes. So I was like, maybe this has the answers because it's a basically a book about photography where he talks about photography. So I flew through and read a couple of pages. And I've read this book about 4 times, I think. So I know it pretty well. I used to, back when I was like teaching, I used to teach it a lot in sort of like film and photography studies sort of classes. So Roland Barthes is one of those pesky French post-structuralists that people like to clown on. But I think he's one of the better ones, mostly because of his style. It's sort of like cool and French, and I'm smoking in a cafe, but I'm kind of approachable too. Like he seems like that kind of guy. Whereas the other frogs, the post-structuralist ones, anyway, they're all about being detached and clinical and highly theoretical. But for me, Barth's sort of he has that. He has quite a bit of that kind of over intellectualism, I guess, but he tempers it with some cute kind of personal narratives, particularly about his mother, in this book anyway. So he started writing this book on photography after his mother died. And I haven't kind of confirmed this or read anything about this, but I'm pretty sure that he did this mostly because photos of his mother were all he had left of her. And he was, like most gay men, a bit of a mummy's boy. Um, and for good reason in their case, I guess, because she sort of single-handedly raised him after his father died quite young in World War One. So the book itself is sort of a series of vignettes and passages that kind of explore what makes a photo powerful and how it captures and preserves the essence of the subject of the photo. So, like I said, a lot of personal narratives, a lot of stuff about his mother, lots of stuff about death, and we'll come to that later. But basically, Bart's kind of whole thing about photographs is that, oh, they constantly remind me of death. Huh? Like, he goes on about that a lot. But he sort of says that he's really fascinated by photographs, and the reason he is that the usual stuff that photographs can evoke memory in the past and create a sort of sense of presence that transcends time. And the way that he says that a lot of photos do this, especially like photos of people, he distinguishes what are the two elements. One is called the studium, and the other is called the punctum. So the studium is like the general kind of interest that a photograph holds, and the punctum is like a detail or I guess element that literally punctures the viewer's consciousness and makes the image kind of striking for that reason. So, and this is when he sets up this opposition and talks about this is when he gets really kind of overly clinical and post-structuralist and stuff. But nevertheless, they're interesting ideas, I think. So Barthes thinks that the punctum is the aspect of the photograph that causes an emotional response in the viewer, like that moves the viewer and makes the photograph kind of unique and unforgettable, right? Yeah, so he contrasts that with the studium, which is the general kind of theme of a photograph. So the studium is something that most viewers can sort of appreciate, but the punctum is more personal and subjective and kind of unique to every viewer's individual experience and emotion. So no matter what the subject matter of the photograph is. And so for that reason, very rare for him, because he's a very analytical guy, says that the punctum is something that can't really be kind of analyzed or dissected, but it's more that it's not dissected, it's not analyzed, it's something that's felt on a really visceral kind of level. And that is kind of, I think, what was going on when I found these photos. Like I picked them up and I was just like, oh, like I was really floored by them. I have no idea why, because they're not particularly well composed photos. They're very small, they're Polaroids, but like I think maybe there's something to this idea of the punctum that maybe was the thing that pierced my cold, dead heart, so to speak. So, and in saying that as well, the punctum's kind of suggests that the punctum is usually something quite small, like a detail that the viewer catches, a gesture, a facial expression, or whatever. So I was thinking about that and was trying to work out what the punctum is in these photos that made me so emotional. I've been looking at them really closely for the past couple of days, and to be honest, I still don't have an answer. So even though I came across this book and like read a few passages and I was like, yeah, something to think about. Food for thought, Roland. Thanks for that. Nothing came to me in terms of anything in the photo itself that kind of struck me as the punctum, so to speak. The one thing that comes to mind, though, is that these photos are really different experientially to all the other photos that I have, like on my phone or on my computer or whatever. Because for one thing, they're material things, they're objects, they're not just like projections on a screen. That might be it, like that I own something physical that is a physical representation of a memory or something. That's the only thing I can think of. The other thing I was thinking of as well is, like I said before, Barthes, he's always constantly complaining in this book about photos are kind of death-like shadows or shadow versions of ourselves, I guess, because they render us, when they're photos of us, they render us kind of inert, lifeless things, literally flat things on paper, captured, unmoving. There's no kind of vibrancy to the way that we are depicted in a photo, at least from his point of view. And I got to thinking about that in particular, and it's interesting that he wrote that because this was before the internet, long before the internet. I think this book was published in 1980. But what I think he's talking about there is the internet or internet photography, because I think internet photos like accomplish this sort of reminder of death that he's constantly talking about in this book much more successfully, because of their quantity, because there are so many photos, just literally photos of everything and everyone. It's this great sort of churn of image and light. So the singularity of your life, your memories, it's just all kind of swallowed by this kind of algorithmic black hole that's in the cloud or whatever. All of these photos just going down the gullet of this big algorithm. But from a different perspective, looking back now, it seems to me that the opposite seems to be true with physical photos. So essentially what Barthes was complaining about in terms of physical photos, there were only physical photos back when he was writing, I think is true now, more so than it was then because of the internet. Uh, so I'm looking at these Polaroids and I just see in them that there's a kind of singularity to them. Not singularity as in, the AI singularity, but more like they're singular. Um, like obviously they're remnants of a moment that's past. Um, and obviously, like Barth suggests, these photos point to the fact that life is a series of past moments, sort of just, I don't know, wisping off into oblivion. Every one of those moments has gone. Like this moment will go, and this one, and this one. You get the picture. But there's something about, I guess, I can't think of any other word but materiality of real photos. Uh, that they're like this touchable apparition of an untouchable past. So for me, when Barth is going on and on about like how photos remind him of death, mostly because of his mother, I think, is very psychoanalytic of me, I know. But to me, it's not, photos aren't necessarily a reminder of death, although they may be that. I sort of view these Polaroids simple and humble, and you know overexposed and small as they are. I kind of see them in an opposite way, in that they are kind of a fearless reply to death's inevitability in a way. Like, here I was, here I am. I've got an object to sort of prove it. And to me, that's why I kind of, even though I've read this book a couple of times, I just put that book down and I was like, okay, I don't think like this anymore. Um, Especially now because of the prevalence of digital photography. Because I think, if anything, what Barthes has to say about like how photography renders us inert and lifeless and into an object, that becomes more of a pressing issue, I guess, with online photography than it does in physical. And maybe that's just because physical photography is not as common anymore. But to me, I think that was possibly the reason why I just got so emotional when these Polaroids fell out of my folder as I was unpacking. It could be just as simple as that. This is a rare object that we don't see that much anymore. And in comparison to its digital form, it therefore has so much more kind of importance, and it strikes me more in a way that all of this barrage of images online doesn't. So even these shitty Polaroids have a kind of hold over me, that they're not fancy images, they're not glittering images, they're just physical manifestations of a moment that's passed. Jetée is a 1962 French film by Chris Marker. It's science fiction, sort of. Well, yeah, it is. And it's Chris Marker is usually a sort of documentary photomontagist, but this is his only kind of science fiction film. And it tells the story of a man who is sent back in time to the past and the future as well, in order to save the present, his present, which is our future. It's a post-apocalyptic story. So the entire film is composed of a series of black and white still photographs, except for one brief scene that is actually a film. which I'll get to later. So, like I said, the protagonist is a character in a post apocalyptic world. He's a prisoner, and scientists kind of experiment on him with a sort of time travel machine. It's kind of a bit airy fairy as to how time travel works, but as we'll get into uh, this film a little bit more, that those sort of technicalities don't really matter. The film's not really about that. It's not science fiction in that. Let's talk about the science kind of way. Um, so the protagonist's memories of a woman he met as a child, they kind of drive his desire to sort of save the world. But the process of time travel, the way that it's sort of set up, is kind of dicey and unpredictable. The man, he's never named a protagonist. He's sort of fascinated, as well as with the woman, as he's been fascinated since childhood, um, long before this devastating nuclear war that basically destroyed Paris. He's been fascinated with a man, an image of a man dying in front of him. So he really can't get that image out of his head. And because of that image, this sort of strong remembrance of the pre apocalypse, the scientists of this kind of dystopian future basically press gang him into a time travel experiment to save the future, so to speak. So, probably sounds familiar to some people who've seen Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys and the 12 Monkeys TV series. And that's because those things are both based on this film. This film was pretty influential with a lot of kind of film nerds in the 60s and 70s. It also influenced William Gibson and David Bowie. And I even heard actually that I think some company in Chicago was going to make it into an opera, which, okay, it's a kind of story that is short, does what it needs to do, and kind of gets out. So I don't see how that translates to opera, but like all power to them. Um, anyway, after my little sort of moment with the photos and the Roland Barthes book, I thought for this episode anyway, I might pair Camera Lucida with La Jetée, because the film, like I said, is composed entirely of still photographs. And like I said, it's a very short film. I think it's about 25 to 26 minutes, but it's actually captivating and in a kind of really haunting way. And maybe because it seems to play out some of the, I guess, morbid ideas Barthes was talking about in Camera Lucida. For instance, that life is a series of disappointing moments, and capturing them in still photography is always going to remind you of the final dissipation, so to speak. So I first saw this. It was in my university's film club. Yeah. So, and what was really funny about this was that the guy who was screening it for us, like who chose it, the guy who ran the cinephile club, so to speak. I can't remember officially what it was called, but it was like a film club or something. So the guy who was screening it, who chose it, who selected it, and got a good copy of it to screen, because you can find it on YouTube today, but back then it wasn't on YouTube. He, in the screening, before the screening, spent longer kind of justifying, rationalizing, and contextualizing and explaining the fucking film's importance. He spent longer than the film actually took to run, explaining all this. It was ridiculous, and he wasn't like a overly verbose kind of guy who always did like a whole sort of kind of preamble before a film. He usually would just say, "This is by this director. It was made in this year, and maybe it's influenced this other filmmaker or whatever." And that was it usually. But with this film especially, he felt the need to do a whole like fucking lecture about it. And I remember him saying things like, "Yeah, all right, guys. There's no moving pictures, but like bear with it, okay, because it's really rewarding. Please don't walk out. like um which is really funny. I find that hilarious because first of all, it's a cinephiles club, so it's for people who like movies and have a sort of high tolerance for experimentation. We watched like silent films, like Man with the Movie Camera, or like the Ziga Vertov thing. Like that's over an hour of like silent moving pictures. So I think I didn't get why he was so kind of he thought that we would not be into this. Um, the other thing that was stunning about it is that literally no one walked out, not even to go to the bathroom. I guess it's a short film, I get, so obviously they wouldn't. But like I could tell I was watching the film and then I, peeked around. I like to peek around at the audience when a film's going. Um, and everyone, literally to a person, was entirely enthralled. There were only about 25 of us, but like they were all enthralled. Like from the get-go too. I think there's some evidence that suggests that still image films take a while for people to warm up to because lots of people are not used to it. And that's probably why this guy gave this sort of a long kind of preamble for it, because he was trying to warm people up before the film, but everyone was into it straight away. I didn't want it to end when I first watched it. I'd obviously seen 12 Monkeys before because it was around, it's kind of later than 12 Monkeys. I think 12 Monkeys was like mid 90s or something. Which 12 Monkeys is a good movie too, by the way. It's got a really great performance by Brad Pitt, and one of the few performances of Brad Pitt that sort of shows off his character actor abilities. That's an interesting thing about him, is that he has leading man looks, but he really does have the skills of a character actor and doesn't get enough props for that. But anyway, that's a side note. So yeah, I saw 12 Monkeys, so I kind of knew the story beats. It's basically very similar to 12 Monkeys, thematically as well. But the experience with this one was, with La Jetée, was it almost like hypnotic or dreamlike or something. Like after I finished it, I kind of felt woozy. Like I know people say that a lot when they encounter art or something like that, but that hardly ever happens to me. Like I get profoundly affected by art, but I never feel physically kind of lightheaded or anything like that after I've seen a great work of art. But this film just really did it for me. I have no idea why. Well, I do have some idea why, but I don't know why this film and not others. So because most of the film, pretty much all of it, except for one like brief little moment, it's just still images building on each other, suggesting movement through time, and sometimes literally movement through time because it's a time travel story. But it's not actually movement through time. It's sort of movement, or it feels like movement through memory. Like it at the start, it almost feels like you're looking, you're poring over a photo album or something. So each still image like illustrates a moment or a memory or a vision of the past that the man, the nameless protagonist, he kind of becomes fascinated by and then travels towards then another moment again. Again, this is part of the time travel kind of device, which doesn't, it's really a bit vague as to how it works, but it does sort of engages with his memories and his memories of the past. And he goes back in time to moments that he has encountered or is about to encounter or something like that. It's very kind of timey-wimey. So he has a meeting in a park with a mysterious woman, and that is just an image or like a trace of a fuller experience, like a phantom out of the past. And he keeps returning back to that when he goes back in time. He goes back to this woman. And this relationship sort of develops as the film goes on, and the montage of images start to get subtly closer to the moving image we would expect in a traditional film. Not that they speed up, but more that they transition into each other in a more like sensible way. Like you see, like instead of 24 frames a second, you won't see that. It's just like a still frame of a guy walking, and then you'll see him walking a little bit further, and things like that, and or walking with the woman in the park. So it starts off very kind of cold and clinical, and here are slices, like tableaus of something, and then it becomes much more personal, and that's where the movement starts to kind of get going, or the sense of movement, in a way. Like it's still photography. So at the beginning, the transitions are just sort of straight cuts, like one image after the other, and that implies movement, I guess. But as the film goes on, the images start to melt into each other, like dissolves become much more prominent. And then these dissolves and like more fancy transitions between the still images kind of culminate in the only moving segment in the film, which is very brief. And it's when the protagonist views the woman waking from sleep. So this image comes to life. Basically, it's like a magic eye kind of thing. Like it suddenly pops to life, and you're actually kind of a little bit taken aback by it because you don't expect it. And yeah, it films at 24 frames per second. She blinks momentarily, and this sort of and the fact that like that moment is the moment that Chris Marker chooses to sort of animate, so to speak. I think fully embraces the sort of dreamy memory one usually has about lovers in particular. It's never just sort of snapshots of holidays or like, glimpses and static images. It's always like the images that you remember, the memories, the strongest memories, they're always really alive. But because the time traveler has been sort of coerced into a mission, this sort of movement, this memory is very fleeting, and he is very quickly yanked back, and the film returns to still image format. The narration over voiceover, it continues, and he comes to meet the woman he loves at the same place where he saw the man die as a child. And then what ends up happening, I'll tell you the whole story, but you can, because the story, like I said, is not a big deal. Like it's more about the images and the experience of it. The scientists from the future end up killing the man in the past so as not to endanger the timeline. And it's revealed that the man had seen his own death all those years ago. So as a boy, this fascinating image that he had, that he was just so obsessed with, of a man dying at the airport, was his own death. Which that element is actually repeated in 12 Monkeys too, if you've seen 12 Monkeys. So, like the story itself, I'm not a really huge fan of time loop stories. I think I might have spoken about that on a previous episode or something. But like I said, the story, it really is the least important part of this film. Partially because it's an art film, so story really isn't that important. It's kind of more about the experience, how it envelops you in a series of stills that in isolation might seem lifeless, but together they're kind of brimming with life, which I find really fascinating in light of what we were talking about before with camera Lucida and Roland Barthes talking about how like this still object kind of renders life inert. So Chris Marker, he kind of invites the eye of the viewer to explore each instance of memory, like to study fucking each corner of the image rather than sort of just passively let it flow over you, like when you're watching a movie. Obviously, you can study movies really closely, but that's why I say it gets to a hypnotic like state, because especially after you've seen the film for a couple of times, and I just finished watching just before I started recording, and watched it again. And after you've watched it a few times, because the images linger, there's you look around them more. Like you're not just looking at the face, you're looking at the foreground, the background, you're seeing what's going on in the image. And like it really trains you to sort of look again and look again. Um, so that's a really interesting part of it. So the main character, so like I said, he goes through a number of those kind of mental experiments in order to, you know, train him up to go through time. Um, but the way that they sort of depict that is not, it's basically through his facial expressions and in still, and you can see it's causing him pain and distress. But because it's a still image, the drama of that is just so much more pronounced because it lingers on that image. And you kind of see every nook and cranny of his crow's feet as he's sort of grimacing. It's really effective. And then the machine itself, which is, again, it's not really well explained scientifically, but you see, you know, how wires connect to a face mask, how like a hammock cradles him as he's being transported through time. So while it's a bunch of still images, I do think that it's not motionless. That's the key contradiction of this film, is that it is a bunch of photographs. They are still for the most part, but there's still a sense of motion. Maybe it's a narrative motion or something, but there is a sense that things are moving even though they're not. And sometimes they do literally move too. Like the photographs themselves, they do kind of quiver as if there's like some off-screen operator holding the camera. And like I said as well, there's those dissolves and fades. And in those fades as well, you see, oh, no, in the dissolves, you see kind of superimposition of different images. That's really kind of interesting. So it's not just like photo, cut, photo, cut, photo. Like it at the start, it's like that, but then it becomes more artistic and sort of more intentional and kind of suggests motion and movement a little bit more, but not motion in the traditional sense of cinema. So with these still images, you kind of become fixated on, because each still image in a way represents a memory. So you become fixated on one memory in the same way that the protagonist is fixated on, you know, the woman or the vision of the man dying, which is him. And it's really great that the images take their time. So you watch this film and it's enthralling, but it's not overwhelming or confusing. You always know where you are, like in terms of what's going on, but it allows you to sort of linger over the images, like I said. So it's contemplative, but it's kind of contemplative of contemplation itself in a way, if you include like memory and looking back on things as a form of contemplation. So not only does the sort of story bend in on itself in that sort of time loopy kind of way, the visuals kind of do as well, because in terms of the purpose of the visuals is to contemplate, be contemplative about contemplation. So that's why I think it's a really good match, I think, with some of the things I've been talking about today in terms of the way that we think about memory and how we capture it, especially in photographs. Like the experience of watching La Jetée is kind of like the experience of memory itself. You know, even when we capture some of it in photos, like memory is always, in some sense, a grab bag, right? Like you have some snapshots of clarity, you remember that very clearly, but even that you can't even be sure of as well, because sometimes you can remember something clearly and they don't happen. There's like the Mandela effect. Is it the Mandela or the Mandela effect? I always forget. I always hear it said, but I don't think I've read it before in words. But anyway, So yeah, memory is a grab bag. Like there, we get some snapshots of clarity, some images we return to now and again, like kind of they recur in our memory. We have fixations on past events, either like public events or events that happen to us. There's like blurred or absent detail, and everything in this grab bag has to be kind of pieced together to look like a narrative. Like that's what life is, right? Life is the narrative that we tell ourselves when we look back on all of our memories and everything that's happened. And if we don't do that, life doesn't really make sense. And I think in a way, that's what I'm kind of taking away from. It's good in a way that I kind of watched La Jetée as well and paired it with this idea about why these photos struck me. It's just that I think that the clearness of memory is not always there, and a photo materializes it for you sometimes. And in the same way that memory and time and life itself is kind of materialized in La Jetée, I think maybe that's what got me so verklempt when I got these photos and found these photos, that it reminded me of memory itself and how it works, and how fleeting it is and how precious it is too. And like in that, I sort of got a bit sentimental because I'm old now. So, and you get old and you get sentimental. But yeah, so I would highly recommend you go and watch La Jetée and read Camera Lucida as well. But Camera Lucida is easy enough to find. You'll probably find it in any library. And La Jetée is actually available on YouTube. There are English and French versions. I prefer the French version, but the French version that I found on YouTube wasn't great. Like it had those auto subtitles on it, and they lagged a bit. So it doesn't kind of correspond with the narration in French. But very early on, I think in the 70s or something, they recorded an English version as well. So the English version is basically just as good, but you know, some of us want to watch it in the original language. So, but yeah, or you can just get it. I think you can probably buy it on Criterion as well. But yeah, highly recommend both of those. And I hope that like all of this talk that I've been doing about memory and photos and consciousness and all this sort of shit is valuable in some way to you, or you know, entertaining in some way to you. But like in signing off, I would just really recommend to sort of going back to your photo albums, having a little look and seeing what else is there as well. Like looking again in the same way that Chris Marker in La Jetée allows you to look at a photo in a movie context, and allows you to really look at it, like keep it there. Don't just turn the page, just like really kind of take it all in. Maybe photos that you've seen 1,000 times, maybe look at them again and see what you find. Maybe you'll get overly emotional just like me.
Look at this photograph. Every time I do, it makes me laugh. How did our eyes get so red? And what the hell is on Joey's head? And this is where I grew up. I think the president owner fixed it up. I never knew we ever went without. The second floor is hot for sneaking out. And this is where I went to school. Most of the time had better things to do. Criminal record says I've broken twice. I must have done it 6 times. I wonder if it's too late. Should I go back and try to graduate? Life's better now than it was back then. If I was them, I wouldn't let me in. Oh, God, every memory of looking out the back say somebody went and burned it down. We used to listen to the radio and sing along with every song we know. We said someday we'd find out how it feels to sing to more than just a steering wheel. Kim's the first girl I kissed. I was so nervous that I nearly missed. She's had a couple of kids since then. I haven't seen her since God knows when. Oh God. Every memory of looking out the back door. I have a photo album spread out on my bedroom floor. It's hard to say it, time to say it. Goodbye, goodbye. Every memory of walking out the front door. I found the photo of a friend that I was looking for. It's hard to say it, time to say it. Goodbye, goodbye. I miss that town. I miss the faces. You can't erase. You can't replace it. I miss it now. I can't believe it. So hard to stay. Too hard to leave it. I could relive those days. I know the one thing that would never change. Every memory of looking out the back door. I have a photo album spread out on my bedroom floor. It's hard to say it, time to say it. Goodbye, goodbye. Every memory of walking out the front door. I found the photo of a friend that I was looking for. It's hard to say it, time to say it. Goodbye, goodbye. Look at this photograph. Every time I do, it makes me laugh. Every time I